G'day guys, how we doing? Welcome to another episode of Dream Fights. And apologies about the intro there. I still haven't changed the name. It still says In Focus there, so apologies about that. But this is Dream Fights, another edition. And tonight, as you can see there, we are going for one of the more polarizing figures in world boxing, isn't it? It's Saul Canelo Alvarez, arguably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Yes, I said arguably because no doubt there's a few of you out there that will dispute that. And Julio Cesar Chavez is probably the one that most people come up with, but there's other ones like Carlos Arate, Ruben Olivares, Marco Tony Barrera, Eric Morales. There's a lot of Mexican. Salvador Sanchez is another one anyway. But tonight, or in this episode, we're going to be discussing Saul Canelo Alvarez. And what we're going to do, if you haven't listened or watched this or listened to or watched this show before, we have a quick review of the career. In this case, it's Saul Canelo Alvarez, and then we'll match him up with 10 great fighters from different eras and see how we would have went. And we do a poll on Instagram as well. If you are going to be a regular viewer of this, make sure you follow us on Instagram for starters, but then also jump on. It's normally on in the last sort of 24 hours before we go to air that I'll put it up. And then we'll read those out as well. And some of the, well, I'm not going to spoil them. I'm not going to read out the names. If you voted on it, you'll know who's on tonight. But if not, we'll keep it a little bit of a surprise. We've got Kane in the chat. How are you there, mate? And the reason why I do this live, by the way, guys, is that I want your input. I'll go through it. I'll give my views on who I think wins and why these dream fights. But I want your feedback as well. Just a little bit of info as well. Normally it's about 30 or 40 seconds behind with the stream. So if I move on and you comment, I will go back and go over your responses to my picks and also your own opinions as well. So I'll have a quick look at the career of Saul Canelo Alvarez. Now, he turned pro in 2005 as a 14-year-old, if you can believe that. Now, he had a lot of fights early. A lot of the results, nearly probably 99% of these fights, or probably 100% of these early fights, by the looks of things, are in Mexico. A lot of information that's sort of hard to garner. Some of the weights are missing and whatever, which sometimes happens in Mexico. But he had his first big fight. Now, when was it? And I remember I was at one of his really early fights. Probably Carlos Baldomir, I reckon, in 2010. Actually, it was probably before that. He fought the brother of Miguel Cotto. It was Jose Cotto. I reckon I was at that card. I'm just going to have a quick look here. It was the Mayweather and Mosley card. I remember seeing him fight Jose Cotto live. And he did actually get rocked in that fight and was on the brink a couple of times, but he came back to win that fight. Probably apart from Carlos Baldomir, I think Love More Nadu, very underrated fighter. This is the fight I was actually at. Matthew Hatton. This is when he won his first world titles, the WBC 154-pound title. And credit to Matthew Hatton for hanging in there in that fight, by the way, because there was 11,000 people there, and I think 10,990 of them were Saul Canelo Alvarez fans. Then this is when the run started. He defended that world title numerous times. He then, I didn't actually realize that. He fought Shane Mosley in 2012. I didn't realize that was actually for the WBC title. I was actually at that fight as well. I think that was on the Cotto and Mayweather card, that one. Unified against Austin Trout, then had his first loss of his career against Floyd Mayweather Jr., then a disputed win over Erislandy Lara. I think that might have been for the WBA belt, then wins over Kirkland, Miguel Cotto, Amir Khan. I was actually at that fight as well. I've been at a few Canelo fights. Liam Smith, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., and then the two memorable fights with Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, and just went about cleaning up the 168-pound divisions, and also 175. He beat Sergey Kovalev and Billy Joe Saunders. Caleb Plant had the loss against Dmitry Bivol as well. The third fight with Gennady Golovkin, and then has won the last, 4 fights against John Ryder, Jamel Charlo, Jaime Munguia, Edgar Berlanga, and then has another shot at unifying the world 168-pound title this weekend against William Skull. So that is Canelo Alvarez. There's a lot to get through there. His current record is 62-2-2 with 39 KOs. And look, I won't even start to go through his career. Undisputed champion at a couple of weights, but world champion at 154, 154, 160, 168, and 175. A truly remarkable champion is Saul Canelo Alvarez. So let's start getting into the fights tonight. As I said, we've got 10 to get through. There might be a couple of fighters in there that might surprise you, but if you're a real fight fan, you go back to my vintage, I think you'll understand why I've put these guys in with Canelo. And I'm going to start with probably a very, very unheralded fighter from the get-go. His name is Mike McCallum. He is the body snatcher. Had a record of 49, 5 and 1, 36 knockouts. He was born in Kingston, Jamaica. Turned pro in 1981. And he won his first world title. I remember this. It was in 1983 against Sean Mannion. It was on the undercard of Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Mustafa Hamsho, the second fight between the two. And that was for the WBA title. Now, it's not actually, here it is coming. Oh, it's actually, sorry, I take that back. It was 1984 against Sean Mannion. Madison Square Garden for the WBA belt. Defended it numerous times. Probably his best defenses or best performances. First one was in 1986 against Julian Jackson, before Julian Jackson became the Hawk and was just knocking people out left, right, and center, and he himself became the WBC 154-pound champion. But he defended against him, knocked him out in 2 rounds. Then his next big win was against Milton McCrory in 1987, the former WBC welterweight champion. Followed it up against the former undisputed 147-pound champion Donald Curry, also in 1987. Lost in his first shot at the middleweight title against Sambu Kalambe, but then won it later against Harold Graham. Also beat Steve Collins, Michael Watson. Avenged his defeat against Sambu Kalambe in 1991. Had the draw against James Toney, lost the rematch to him, and just continued on. Won actually the WBC World Middleweight title against our own Jeff Harding in 1994. Lost the title to Fabrice Tioso in 1995, and then lost fights against Roy Jones Jr. and James Toney for the third time in 1997. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but geez, what a champion that Mike McCallum was. So let's first of all go to the poll. And I was surprised by this. Well, surprised but not surprised. I'm not surprised that 82% of you out there went for Canelo Alvarez to beat Mike McCallum. But I was surprised that maybe, that people didn't give him more of a shot at beating Canelo, because I, for one, think that Mike McCallum would have given Canelo Alvarez all he could handle. He was a very, very underrated guy. He was he was tall for his weight, both at 154 and 160, and also actually at 175. He was a nice height for that weight division. He could box, he could punch, very, very good boxing IQ, as have most of these fighters on this list, but a very, very underrated fighter. I'll say it again. I know I've said it a couple of times, but I think his style and his IQ and just his all-round boxing ability would have given Canelo Alvarez fits for the majority of this fight. Next to the guys, where's the poll? It's actually on Instagram, mate. It's finished now. It goes up 24 hours before this telecast. So apologies if you've missed that, but like our and subscribe to our Instagram channel or page or whatever the hell it is, and you can vote on that. As I said, it's normally on about 5 or 6 o'clock on a Tuesday before we do this program. So apologies if you missed that one. But yeah, look, I think Mike McCallum would frustrate Canelo. He would frustrate him also as far as just his movement, his hand speed. Not that he was a fast puncher was Mike McCallum, but he was a precise puncher and a very, very well-timed type of guy with his punches. And I think he would, as I said, give Canelo Alvarez all he could handle. Now, I'm going to pick Canelo Alvarez by a very, very tough and close 12-round decision. This fight, by the way, would be fought probably either at 154 or 160. I think both of these guys carry the weight very well there. What's that there, Nectar? I don't do IG. I'm too old. Sorry about that, mate. Give us your thoughts anyway. Who wins the fight? There's no reason why you can't comment there. Who wins between Canelo and Mike McCallum? But as I said, I've got Canelo Alvarez in a very, very tough decision win over Mike McCallum, the body smash, not body smasher, the body snatcher. And again, I think it'll be a tough fight for Canelo, but I think he has enough to get over Mike McCallum. All right, guys, let's move on to the next fight. Keep the comments coming there, by the way. I'll go back to them if I've missed it, but put them in the chat and give us your thoughts on the McCallum fight. Next one up is the Hawk, who I just mentioned, who fought Mike McCallum. This is Julian Jackson. Had a record of 55-6, 49 KOs. Now, he turned pro in 1981 and just fought his way through, what's that, Nick? You would have said Canelo. Okay, good stuff, mate. So he had a lot of knockouts early. Pretty much all his early fights were by knockout. Got his shot at Mike McCallum in, what year did I say? It was 1986 is when he was stopped in the second round, but he learned a lot from that. He came back. I think, did he beat Eubank for the WBA title? I'm not sure because they don't list the WBA belt on here. But he did win. Sorry, it might have been Buster Drayton. Actually, he was the IBF champion, Buster Drayton. But either way, he knocked him out in the third round, and a devastating knockout too, by the way. It must have been, I think it was Eubank who he beat for the title. Buster Drayton was probably his next big win. As I said, that highlight reel third round knockout. He had a lot of highlight reel KOs, I can tell you. Knocked out Terry Norris in the second round. Again, this is probably like McCallum did to Jackson. Jackson did to Terry Norris. Iced him in 2 rounds in defense of that WBA title in 1989 before Norris, I think, went on to beat John McGubby. And also, geez, I keep saying this, like the highlight reel knockout of Harold Graham, and you got to watch that on YouTube. What a knockout that was. Harold Graham was actually winning that fight. And I think he got hit with it might have been a right hook from an orthodox stance or something like that, but really just knocked him out cold. We'll go through his record there. Was beaten by Gerald McClellan in 1993 for the WBC middleweight title. Was knocked out in the rematch 94 in the first round. I forgot about that fight, actually. Yeah, that's right. He did knock him out in the rematch too. Lost another shot at the WBC middleweight title against Quincy Taylor in 95, and was beaten by his last 2 fights against Vernon Phillips and Anthony Jones. So that is Julian Jackson. Now, look, actually, we'll firstly go to the poll. 76% think that Canelo Alvarez would beat Julian Jackson, and I have to agree. Look, I think apart from the dynamite he had in either hand, Julian Jackson, I think apart from that, I'm not quite sure he would have had the tools to go with Canelo. Canelo, you've got to remember, has really good timing as far as picking his opponent's punches coming at him. And I think he would have just anticipated a lot coming from Julian Jackson, made him pay with counters. And I think he would have won a clear-cut 12-round decision for me. Look, it would have been a really, really dangerous fight for Canelo. Julian Jackson, what did I say, had 49 knockouts in 55 wins. He could punch, like probably pound for pound, the biggest puncher, I think, in the history of boxing. I know that's arguable, but this guy could really punch. And as I said, I think with the power-wise, he might give Canelo some troubles, but Canelo took some massive punches from some big hitters over the years, and none of them were able to rock him. So I'm not quite sure Jackson would have done it either. And I think, as I said, Canelo wins a pretty, I won't say one-sided, but a clear-cut 12-round decision over the Hawk, Julian Jackson. All right, let's get into the Brits now. We're going to have a crack at Canelo Alvarez. We've got 3 to get through. The first one, let's start with Chris Eubank. And he was, what was his name? He had a really interesting name. What was it? Simply the Best. That's right. That was his moniker. He had a record of 45-5 with 23 knockouts. Turned pro in 1985. And who can forget those 2 memorable fights with Nigel Benn? Just going through his record here. We'll go back to the screen for starters. Gary, who did he fight for actually it might have been Nigel Benn. Yeah, he stopped him in the 9th round for the WBO middleweight title. Defended it a couple of times, 3 times. One was that win over Michael. Actually, he had a couple of wins over Michael Watson. That's right. Toney Thornton was another one. Lindell Holmes was good back in the day. Had the rematch with Nigel Benn in 1993, which was a very, very tough draw. Just continue to go through his record there. Lost the belt to Steve Collins. Had the rematch with Steve Collins and lost to him a second time. Joe Calzaghe, he lost over 12 rounds and then finished up with a couple of losses to Carl Thompson. So, as I said, their record 45-5-2 with 23 knockouts, but very, very good fighter back in the day. What do you got there, Nectar of the Gods? Canelo over Eubank for me. Well, let's see what the poll said. What's that, Kane? Canelo is an all-time great counterpuncher and a great chin. I agree. Yep. Well said there, mate. All right, so with the poll, 82% of you out there went for Canelo Alvarez to beat Chris Eubank Jr. Now, this is probably a little bit like the Mike McCallum fight for me. I think Chris Eubank's style would be very, very difficult for Canelo Alvarez. And he wasn't the most talented type of guy, but he was very awkward. He had very good movement. Technique was very good. I just think he might have lacked the strength and power to really go with Canelo. This fight, of course, would have been at 160. I just think Canelo would have probably worn him down, probably again with that anticipation that he has. I think he would have been able to pretty much combat anything that Chris Eubank had in store for Canelo Alvarez. And I think that Canelo wins this fight, probably again by decision. I don't think he stops Chris Eubank. I think Eubank himself was very, very tough, very, very durable, and just his awkwardness would make it hard for Canelo, I think, to nail him down and really sit down on his punches and get him out of there. So I'm going to go with Canelo Alvarez in this one, probably again by clear-cut 12-round decision. Let's go to a couple of comments there. What do we got there? Andy, super chat. Thanks very much, mate. $10. Really appreciate that, mate. What's that? Hello, boxing fans. McCallum was a beast. Julian Jackson was a KO sensation. Canelo versus either would have been lit. And yes, subscribe, share, and smash that like button, please, folks. Really appreciate that there, Andy. It all helps, mate. What do you got there, Toney? I truly believe Eubank would give Canelo a hard 12 rounds, but the Chockies go to Canelo. Good fight. Yeah, look, no argument there, Toney. It would be a very, very tough fight for Canelo, but he's been in a lot of tough fights over the years against some very, very good fighters, and I'm just not sure whether Eubank maybe would have had that sort of plan B or C that he would have needed, and a little bit of diversity to be able to rattle Canelo Alvarez. So I've got Canelo Alvarez again by probably a clear-cut decision. Still on the British fighter, let's go to someone that Chris Eubank knows very well, and that is Nigel Benn, the Dark Destroyer. A record of 42-5-1 with 35 knockouts. And he turned pro in 1987. And who did he fight for the world title? Won the Commonwealth title a couple of times. Let's see. Just trying to see who he... There it is there. Doug DeWitt. Very, very durable. Look, he was sort of more known as a journeyman, Doug DeWitt, but he did have that WBO world title, and he beat him in 1990, stopped him actually in the 8th round. And who can forget that win over Iran Barkley, the first round knockout, who didn't make the list tonight, but I was very, very tempted to throw him in there with Canelo just for entertainment purposes. But he beat Iran Barkley, lost the belt to Chris Eubank in 1990, came back, and when was it? He beat Mauro Galvano for the WBC super middleweight title. Defended that a few times. Had the draw with Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Sr. That fateful win over Gerald McClellan. The tragedy that was with McClellan suffering brain damage in that fight. Lost the belt in 1996 to Tholani Malinga. Also lost a couple of fights to Steve Collins. And probably a little bit like Chris Eubank, lost his last 2 fights against the same opponent in pretty disappointing fashion. What do we got there, guys? All right, what's that, Batman? I'm here at the MGM watching this. Oh, that's awesome, mate. What time is it over there at the moment? What do we got? Where is it? Was it Las Vegas? It's 2:20 in the morning. I suppose that's pretty early for Las Vegas, isn't it, Batman? Hope you have a great weekend, mate. You're obviously over there to watch Ney. In a way, we're talking about a couple of your countrymen over there fighting Canelo Alvarez. Who we got? Nectar of the Gods says Canelo over Benn for me. Toney says Canelo over Benn by way of a knockout in the middle of rounds. K-Mac says, good fight for as long as Canelo wants it to go for Canelo by KO. Well, let's go to the poll, and pretty one-sided this one. 94% of you out there said that Canelo Alvarez would beat Nigel Benn. Now, I've got to agree with that. Look, I think Nigel Benn, a lot like his son, very, very predictable, very, very one-dimensional. Yes, very tough and hard and can punch. What did I say Nigel Benn's knockout ratio was? 35 knockouts in 42 fights. So, look, I think Nigel Benn will be extremely tough, but I just think the way he fights and the way he just comes forward with absolutely reckless abandon, has no game plan, has no ability to set up his punches. I sound like I'm talking about his son in his fight last week with Eubank Jr., don't I? But exactly the same type of fighters. Nigel Benn would come forward, but being so predictable, you don't want to be that way against Canelo Alvarez, who I think would just pick Nigel Benn apart. And I've got a feeling he would actually stop Nigel Benn, let's say by 9th round stoppage. Maybe not knock him out. He might put him down by an accumulation of punches, but I just think that Canelo Alvarez would overwhelm Nigel Benn, and either maybe his corner might stop it or the referee might call it a day, but I think he stops Nigel Benn in the 9th round. What do you got there, Batman? Didn't land till late, and thanks. No worries at all, mate. What do you got there? Canelo would beat Benn. Still Nigel was a beast. Yeah, not saying the fight would be easy, Batman. I think it would be a very, very torrid affair for Canelo. I mean, no matter what, Nigel Benn always came to fight. And I just think, though, again, just the IQ of Canelo Alvarez would just repel anything that Nigel Benn had to offer. Yep, the first 3 or 4 rounds would be a bit of a roller coaster, but I think Canelo Alvarez, once the dust settled or the pace really settled and the rhythm, both fighters got into that rhythm, I just think Canelo Alvarez would just target Nigel Benn, and I think he would get him out of there, as I said, in about 9 rounds. All right, still with one English fighter to come. And this is probably the toughest of all. I'm referring to Joe Calzaghe. And what was his nickname? He was the Pride of Wales / the Italian Dragon. Very, very underrated fighter. Again, he had a record of 46-0 with 32 KOs. Now, he turned pro in 1993 and worked his way through all those fights in England. They were trying to see when he won his first titles against. It was against Chris Eubank Sr., and he won a 12-round decision for the WBO middleweight title. Defended that numerous times against the likes. Actually defended. I didn't know that. Actually, Rick Thornberry was an Aussie. I didn't know that. He beat him in 1999. His best wins, I'm just going through his record. He defended a lot of times. Not against a lot of the massive names out there. Had the win over Jeff Lacey. Sakio Bika, very, very good win. Mikhail Kessler, another one. Bernard Hopkins, of course. And Roy Jones Jr. in 2008. That was at light heavyweight, by the way. And retired in 2008 with a win over both of those legends. Interesting, too, is he was dropped in the first round by both of those guys and went on to dominate both fights. So, as I said, retired in 2008 with a record of 46-0 with 32 knockouts. All right, let's go to the poll before we get a couple of your comments there. And surprisingly for me, 53% went for Canelo Alvarez to beat Joe Calzaghe. So I'll just get to my predictions in a second. What do you got there, Toney? Joe Calzaghe all day and night. He was just a Welsh beast. Would have loved to see him fight. Well, Toney, I've got to agree with you, mate. I didn't hesitate for 2 seconds or even 1 second, in my opinion, of this fight. I just think Joe Calzaghe wins this fight hands down. I just think Canelo Alvarez, his style is just custom made for Joe Calzaghe. I think the opposite. Joe Calzaghe's style is all wrong for Canelo Alvarez. And I think that, not that he's as polished as Dimitri Bivol, but I think Calzaghe and Bivol are very, very similar fighters. Very tall. They can fight southpaw. They can fight orthodox, in and out. They punch in volumes. They give you angles from everywhere. They give you different directions they'll come at you with. I just don't think Canelo Alvarez would have a hope of pinning Joe Calzaghe down. Very, very awkward fighter. And as I said, I think he's very, very similar to Dimitri Bivol in the style that he fights. I don't think, again, is as polished as Bivol, but in his own way, very, very awkward. He leads with his left, leads with his right. He'll hit you with an uppercut and a hook and a body shot or whatever. He hits you from all different directions at different angles. And I just think, again, that style is all wrong for Canelo Alvarez. I've got Joe Calzaghe in a very, very one-sided decision. I don't think Canelo Alvarez has really got the ability to be able to cut Joe Calzaghe off. And you look at a lot of Calzaghe's fights, he doesn't stand still. And someone like Canelo Alvarez, who would need to stop, plant his feet and dig in, Calzaghe is just not there. He's in, he's out, he's left, he's right. And I just don't think he would give Alvarez an opportunity to set and sit down on his punches. I just think this is, again, a one-sided decision in favour of Joe Calzaghe for me. Get a couple of your comments there. Nectar of the Gods. This be Canelo's toughest fight so far in the show, but I still got Canelo. Okay. What's that, a fantasy fight? Frost versus Calzaghe. Yeah, it would be good. Andy says Calzaghe for me. Kane says that's a hard one. I think Canelo on points, but not 100%. Sitting on the fence. Come on, Kane. Don't be shy there, mate. Yeah, look, maybe I'm underestimating Canelo Alvarez a little bit, but it's purely comes down to me. It's styles. That's all it is. I'm not saying that, I know it probably sounds silly to say this, I'm not saying that Calzaghe was a better fighter. I'm just saying that the style is all wrong for Canelo. Again, I just don't think he will be able to get Calzaghe to sit still for long enough to really dig in. And you look at Canelo, he likes to stop, sit, set, and then punch. And by that stage, Calzaghe's in and out and is throwing 3 or 4 or 5 punches, and he's gone. That's the reason why I've gone for Joe Calzaghe to win this in a pretty lopsided decision. What's that? Double G, Canelo, Bivol 2, and he beats him. Yeah. Well, it's maybe a possibility there, Double G, but we will see. But there you go. So that is what our 5th fight down, and I've got Calzaghe beating Canelo. So I think so far I had him. That was the first loss I've got for Canelo in this episode. So I had him beating McCallum, Jackson, Eubank, Benn, but not beating Joe Calzaghe. All right, let's move on. This is where it starts to get interesting. We're into the second half. This is where always probably the more juicy fights are, I think. Let's start with probably the ultimate grudge fight in this series, and it is the Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya, 39-6, 30 knockouts. And I'll just go back to my homepage there. Turned pro in 1992 after winning the Olympic gold medal at the Barcelona Olympics. It was moved along very, very quickly. Had a couple of good wins early against Jeff Mayweather, Troy Dorsey, good fighters. And he got his opportunity a couple of years later when he fought Jimmy Bradal and he won the WBO 130-pound title by a 10th round stoppage or a retirement. Defended that numerous times, including over former featherweight champion Jorge Paez. He also beat the likes of John Molina, Rafael Ruiz, Gennaro Hernandez, Jesse James Leija, Darrell Tyson. Then his biggest career win up to that point over Julio Cesar Chavez by 4th round stoppage because of the cut. Had the win over Pernell Whitaker for the welterweight title. Also beat the likes of Hector Camacho, Wilfredo Rivera. Had the rematch with Julio Cesar Chavez. A very, very good fight against Ike Corte when he won a 12-round split decision. Also beat the likes of Obakar before he had his first professional loss against Felix Trinidad. Came back and didn't beat Shane Mosley. He had his second career loss in 2000 against him, 12-round points decision. Came back and beat Arturo Gatti. Fernando Vargas had another loss to Shane Mosley. Then won the middleweight title against Felix Sturm. Lost to Bernard Hopkins in a fight he probably didn't really need to take, but he did anyway. Lost a very close decision to Floyd Mayweather Jr. Then one more win against Steve Forbes and was retired by Manny Pacquiao in 2008. All right, to the poll. And you couldn't split them out there in boxing land. 50-50 split. 50% for Alvarez, 50% for De La Hoya. What do you got there, Toney? The Golden Boy on points. Wow, imagine seeing these two fight both in their prime. Now, Had a couple of people ask about the weight. I'm probably thinking this is probably going to be at 154. Look, maybe it could have taken place at 160. Oscar did win a world title at 160. I don't think it really matters. I think both of these guys carried 154 and 160 pretty comfortably. But you're right, what a fight this would have been. The ultimate grudge fight. I know, actually, back then it probably wouldn't have been, but it would obviously is today with what's happened in post-career with De La Hoya promoting Canelo. But it would have been an awesome fight. Nectar, what do you got there, mate? Damn, I'm not sure here. Oscar was bloody good too. Would depend on weight, but at 168, I'd have Canelo. Oscar never fought at 168, so we're going to either 154 or 160 there, mate. So who you got? Young Gun says Oscar's footwork and jab would be too much. Oh, look, this is a really, really difficult fight. Look, the style of Oscar I know would bother Canelo, but I also know that Canelo's style would bother Oscar. Now, I can see Oscar upright as he always did, sort of flicking out the jab, throwing those combinations, coming over the top. Really good on his feet was Oscar. But look, I'm going to back Canelo to actually break De La Hoya down as the fight goes on. Now, again, this is at 154. Oscar's best fights were probably 135 to 147, so slightly above his preferred weight. But on the other hand, Canelo probably didn't hit his peak until he actually went to 160, did he? Or even better, even at 168. So, but look, we've got to pick someone. I think it would be an entertaining fight. I just think as the fight went on, when both fighters probably started to dig their heels in a little bit more, maybe Oscar's footwork would become less of a factor as the fight went on and he started to probably sit down on his punches a little bit more, maybe got a little bit fatigued. I can just see Canelo closing the distance, starting to get inside of Oscar, and I think he might even stop Oscar late. That's the way I probably see the fight. Look, worst case, I think that Canelo wins this fight by clear-cut decision, but I'm probably leaning, if I have to really pick one or the other, probably by 10th or 11th round stoppage, I'm going to pick Canelo Alvarez to stop Oscar. Now, again, this is nothing about the legacies of both guys and who is a better fighter. I'm just looking at the weight and the styles, and I just think at 154, I think Canelo Alvarez wins this fight. So let me know. I've got a couple of comments in the chat. What do you got there, Kane? I'm just going to say Oscar, great fight, though. At 154, I'd have Oscar. 160, I'm not so sure. And he says 154 makes most sense. Canelo versus Oscar could go either way. Tough one. Another lit fight. Yeah, well, we have to pick someone there, Andy. And as I said, mate, I'm going to go for Canelo Alvarez by 10th, maybe 11th round stoppage of Oscar. Because, look, the thing is with Oscar too, as a lot of his fights, he would start really well. And his ability and just his natural boxing technique would take him a long way. But as the fight would go on, he might sort of lose his cool a little bit, maybe lose his composure somewhat, and would sometimes get caught up in maybe some some exchanges that he doesn't really need to get caught up in. Let's remember the fight with Trinidad. He let that fight slip. I think he almost let the Ike Corte fight slip as well. He can get sort of emotional about things and get caught up in a bit of a firefight. So that's probably the last thing he wants to do against a big, strong, solid 154-pounder in Canelo Alvarez. And that's probably another reason why I've got him stopping Oscar late. I picked the fence, says Andy. Good call there, mate. There's the pound-for-pound king. How are you, mate? I didn't get the notification. Sorry about that, mate. I did put it up a couple of days ago, but apologies you didn't see that. Who you got pound for pound? Let us know your thoughts between this man, Canelo Alvarez, and Oscar De La Hoya. Would have been a fantastic fight. All right, we will move on. Give us your thoughts if you've got any more on that fight. But again, for me, Canelo Alvarez over Oscar De La Hoya. Got a couple of very, very hard fights to pick coming up. Let's go to the next one. And this is the Hitman, Thomas Hearns. Now, this is not the Motor City Cobra. This is the Hitman. The Cobra was left behind at 147. This is the fully fledged, awesome 154-pound version of Thomas Hearns. Let's have a look at the Hitman. Turned pro in 1977 and worked his way through. It was just a a bulldozer, wasn't he? Or, as it said in his nickname, the Cobra, he was just nailing everybody. Finally, he got his first shot at a world title against Pepino Cuevas. That was in 1980. And he absolutely obliterated the reigning WBA welterweight champion in 2 rounds. Just got a couple of comments there. Pound for pound says Oscar. Okay, good call there, mate. That was over Canelo. He had, what did he have? 1, 2, 3 defenses of that belt before he came up in a unification fight against Sugar Ray Leonard. He was stopped in the 14th round, and that was the last fight that he would have at the weight. He moved up to 154 and got an opportunity against Wilfred Benitez in 1982. Won a 15-round decision for that WBC belt. Defended it numerous times, including a spectacular second-round knockout of Roberto Duran. And that, to me, is one of the most devastating and impressive knockouts of all time. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure if you're watching this program, you have seen him knock out Roberto Duran. But for me, one of the best knockouts ever. Then moved up to middleweight and fought Marvelous Marvin Hagler in 1995. Was stopped in 3 rounds in one of the greatest fights ever. Continued on at middleweight, came back and had a few wins before getting, or 3 wins before getting a shot at the WBC light heavyweight title. He stopped Dennis Andrees in the 10th round. Then went back to middleweight and made it 4 world titles. The first fighter ever to do this, by the way, with a 4th round knockout of Juan Roldan in Las Vegas. Lost the title in his first fight, or first defense against Iran Barkley. Again, one of the most spectacular knockouts you'll ever see, but on the other end this time, that was Hearns getting knocked out. Won the WBO super middleweight title in the first ever WBO title fight, and then had the draw with Sugar Ray. Beat the likes of Michael Olajide, Virgil Hill for the WBA 175-pound title. Lost that title also to the Blade, Iran Barkley. And then, well, where did he lose? I don't think he regained a title, not a proper title anyway after that. Had a couple of fights before retiring 2006 with a stoppage of Shannon Lamberg in Michigan. So that is the Hitman, retired with a record of 61-5, 1 draw with 48 knockouts. One of the true greats of our sport. All right, the weight. I'm going to say 160. Look, either one. This is a tough one. 154 to 160, I think. Well, this is probably the first fight for me that the weight has a bearing. I think at 154, I'm going for Hitman, Thomas Hearns. At 160, I think I would go for Canelo. I'll get to the reasons why in a second, but let's go to the poll for starters. Only 41% went for Canelo, 59% went for the Hitman, Thomas Hearns. Let's get a couple of your comments. Oh, there's Toby in the chat. Good morning from the UK. How are you, mate? Welcome to the show. Andy, geez, Tommy was a beast. One of my favourite, to be honest. I think he's the first, 4 division champion he was, mate. Yeah, crazy record. Just a true all-time great was the Hitman. Now, all right, so let's see. At 154, I think Thomas Hearns was absolutely electric. I think 154 was his perfect weight, and I think this is where he was at his peak. Canelo Alvarez, on the other hand, this is where he started, of course, but I think he really hit his peak at 160 and was the most comfortable at 160. I think he fights at 168 now, purely because he just can't be bothered getting down to 160 anymore and just wants to be comfortable as his career goes on. So at 154, I think, I'm not going to say knocks Canelo out, but I think over 12 rounds, I'm backing that Thomas Hearns can get the job done over Canelo. But I got to say, I'm not saying it with a lot of confidence, even at 154. I'm going to go for Hearns by decision over Canelo at 154, which I know Tommy didn't really win a lot of fights by decision. I think he starts this fight very, very fast. I think he builds a lead. I think he rocks maybe even Canelo a couple of times early. As the fight goes on, I think Canelo closes the gap. Maybe there's a few nervous moments for Hearns, but I think that he hangs on and wins a 12-round decision. I think at middleweight at 160, this is where I know Tommy won we obviously won world titles at this weight and also at 175 and 168 as well. But I think after he went to 160, he got a little shaky. He could be hurt. He could be rocked. And I think at 160, I'm backing Canelo Alvarez to actually get to Tommy and knock Tommy Hearns out in about 9 or 10 rounds. So I know it seems odd to have two drastically different results when you're talking 6 pounds, but in this instance, I'm going to go for Hearns at 154 and Canelo Alvarez at 160. It's a little bit on the fence, I suppose. If you had to nail me down on one or the other, let's say they have a catch one at 157, I don't know, I'm going to go for Canelo. I know that's probably not the popular vote, but I just think, again, Tommy still with that suspect chin, and Canelo, when he needs to, he can punch, and his timing and everything, and Tommy does tend to, or did tend to get tired and will probably get a little bit careless as the fatigue sets in, and that's when I reckon Canelo could have nailed him. But I've also, on the flip side, think Canelo has the chin to withstand any early onslaught from Tommy Hearns. And that's why if I've got to pick one or the other, I'm going to go for Canelo. Who we got there, guys? Kane says, have to go with a hitman on this one. If he could do that to Duran, I think he could do it to Canelo. Yeah, it's a good point, Kane, because up to that point, Roberto Duran, no one had really been able to penetrate his chin either, had they? He'd never been knocked out, or had he? I think he maybe been put down once as a lightweight, as a shock knockdown, but never really hurt, or obviously never knocked out. So, good point, Kane. What's that? I forgot about this. Canelo still sucks. 154. Tommy says Toney. And Tommy. Tommy destroys Canelo with reach, says Toney. Tommy on points says the pound for pound king. And he says Tommy had speed, power, and could box. Awesome fighter, Manny Stewart fighter, that's for sure. Glenn saying playing catch up, Calzaghe too much volume, and Tommy at any weight, I think he beats Benn. And Team Kronk says Toney, yep. If you pick Canelo over Tommy, you're drunk. Well, I might be drunk then, Glenn. But you got to remember that Hagler was able to get to Tommy Hearns. Leonard obviously was. Now I know it's coming. While Canelo Alvarez is nothing on those guys, I think he is, and that's why again I'm going to go for him. Just let me say it again, Glenn. I don't understand. Look at it just not for one dimensionally. Well, it's Tommy Hearns. He just beat Canelo. Look at it, the two styles, and I just think that yes, early Tommy would be all that Canelo would be able to handle with the speed, with his power. I just think Canelo, he would know what to expect against Hearns at that weight. I think he would be cautious early, and I think once the fight started to get into its groove after 4 or 5 rounds, I just think you would see Canelo go to work, and I really think he breaks Tommy Hearns down. Tommy was more of a explosive fighter that was really good early. The longer the fight went, the more vulnerable Hearns was. And that's where I just think Canelo is able to get to. I just don't think Canelo's the type of fighter that's going to get iced by Tommy Hearns. I just can't see it. A big, strong, solid fighter at that weight was Canelo, and I just think he gets to Hearns. So that's just my opinion anyway. I might go have another drink then, Glenn. It has been a long day though, Tommy, that's for sure. Toney, sorry. All right. Styles, Canelo, nothing like Hagler. Yeah, no, you're right. Look, it's each to their own. I think style-wise, I just think Tommy Hearns' style is custom-made for Canelo to do his thing. I suppose if I've got to break it down, as great a fighter as Hearns was, I just think Canelo Alvarez has got what it takes to knock Hearns out later in the fight. But anyway, I'm in the minority with you guys as well as online because 59% went for Hearns. So there you go. What the hell do I know? Let's move on, guys. We will go to the next one. We've got 3 fighters to go. All right, where are we? Keep the comments coming there, guys. Next one, we have Bernard Hopkins. Now, is he the alien version or the executioner version of Bernard Hopkins? Now, he's another one that fought at various weights. He fought at 160, 168, and then 175. So he turned pro in 1988. So he was a late bloomer, I suppose, was Bernard Hopkins. Had his first world title fight against another great fighter, Roy Jones Jr. That was in 1993. And that was on the undercard. I remember watching this fight thinking, geez, these two guys are pretty good. It was on the undercard of who was it? Riddick Bowe and Jesse Ferguson. The heavyweight, was the heavyweight title fight? And yes, it was. Heavyweight title fight in 93. So that was for the vacant IBF middleweight title that was for. And he lost a 12-round decision to Roy Jones Jr. He then went, I'm just going to say, probably his first big win after that was against former WBC 154-pound champion Lupi Aquino in 94. He had a 12-round decision over him. Then beat Segundo Mercado for the IBF middleweight title in 94. Defended it numerous times against the likes of John David Jackson, Glenn Johnson, Simon Brown, who was a very, very good 147-pound champion, Antoine Eccles. We know him well with his fight with Anthony Mundine. He actually beat him twice. Also beat Felix Trinidad in 2001. William Joppy, who else he's got there? Oscar De La Hoya was probably his more, I suppose, the biggest name on his record, arguably, I suppose, with Felix Trinidad. Had the 2 losses to Jermaine Taylor, beat Antonio Tava, Winky Wright, lost to Joe Calzaghe, beat Kelly Pablo. He was just the guy that just kept winning fights he was supposed to lose. Had the revenge win over Roy Jones Jr., although Roy Jones was coming off a first-round knockout loss to Danny Green. Those 2 fights with Jean Pascal, the first one was a draw, second one was a win. The 2 fights also with Chad Dawson, a no contest. He had the injury against Chad Dawson, lost the rematch. And then, just looking there, he lost to Sergey Kovalev and then lost his last fight against Joe Smith Jr. Final record of 55-8, 2 draws, 32 KOs. All right, what do we got here? Glenn says Bernard pretty easy. Geez, I'm not going to be in your good books tonight, Glenn. What else we got there? Young Gun says Hopkins too much IQ. Hopkins in a canter, KO early rounds. Okay. Glenn says Hopkins too big, too dirty, too smart. He wins it easily. Hopkins was unified champion at 49 years old when he fought Kovalev. Yeah, he was, Young Guns. All right, to the poll. And 59% thought that Bernard Hopkins would beat Canelo Alvarez. Pound for pound king agrees. He went for Bernard Hopkins. All right, so I'm going to agree. I'm going to go with Bernard Hopkins, but I'm not going to do it with a lot of confidence. Now, I know it probably looks like Glenn's probably going to differ with my opinion of that. Look, I think he wins, Bernard Hopkins, but purely by size and boxing IQ. Look, he was a good puncher, but I don't think he was a big puncher, was Bernard Hopkins. And I don't think that really would have come into play against Canelo Alvarez anyway. Andy says Hopkins. Kane says, I'm going for Hopkins only because he was so awkward. That's got a lot to do with it as well, Kane. I just think the size difference for me is a massive, massive factor. Look, the one thing I will say in defense of Canelo, if you're on that side of the fence where you think he wins, is that Bernard Hopkins was very, very predictable. Nothing that he really did. I know he was awkward. I get that. But he was also at the same time very predictable and pretty one-dimensional. Maybe two-dimensional. But he wasn't multi-dimensional, if that makes sense. I think Canelo would be able to pick what he's going to do. Canelo Alvarez, you talk about boxing IQ. Canelo Alvarez has got one of the best boxing IQs I've ever seen. And I don't think it's probably recognised enough. And I think he will pick Hopkins coming in. I think he nails Hopkins with some really good counter punches. I just think the difference in size and not so much power, but just the weight and size difference. Hopkins was a very, very big 160-pounder. Obviously went up to 175 pounds as well. And I think that for me, if I've got to pick one or the other, I just think that he would maybe be able to negate Canelo Alvarez, maybe spoil him a little bit, and just take away a few of Canelo's sort of strengths, which he just had a habit of doing, and beat a lot of talented fighters just by being able to negate them, as I said, and take away their strengths and then enforce his strengths onto them. So I'm going to pick Bernard Hopkins on points, but, excuse me, it wouldn't be an easy fight if you're asking me. Glenn says Bernard loves shorter guys with low volume. Canelo just made for him. Yeah, that's a really good point too, Glenn, is that the Canelo's not a real busy fighter, and Bernard Hopkins would take advantage of that as well. So, okay, we are in agreement. I did go with Bernard Hopkins though, Glenn, but I'm not saying it's completely one-sided because, again, I just think the way Bernard can be predictable, in the way he fights, Canelo Alvarez would pick his shots and have his moments in the fight. But I'm going to go with Bernard Hopkins on points. All right, so we've got 2 to go. What do we got there? Young Guns. Hopkins was so crafty. He didn't have the natural talent of, let's say, Roy Jones, but made up with it with technical ability and IQ. Young Guns for sure, 100%, mate. That is very well said. All right, let's go to the last 2 fights. And this is one that, again, this surprised me as far as the results go. I'm talking of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Turned pro in 1973, the former world middleweight champion, and finished with a record of 62-3-2 with 52 KOs. Let's start with the poll. And surprisingly, not surprisingly as far as who he all went through, but it's probably the lopsided amount that really surprised me. 76% went for Marvelous Marvin Hagler to beat Canelo Alvarez, so only 24% for Canelo. We'll have a quick look at Hagler's record. As I said, he turned pro in 1973. Had his first world title fight against Vito Antuofermo. Actually, he had a couple of early losses. One was to Bobby Watts and the other one was to Willie Monroe, but didn't lose for a long time after that. And he actually avenged those losses as well. He actually did beat back in the day, by the way, Roy Jones. So was that Roy Jones Sr.? Don't know. But he did avenge those losses to Willie Monroe and Bobby Boogaloo Watts. So he got his first crack at the world title in 1979. And it was a 12-round draw with Vito Antuofermo. Most people, well, probably 99% of people thought that Hagler won. And you couldn't blame Hagler at that stage for really thinking the boxing world was against him. No one really wanted to crack at him, to be honest, because he was a very awkward southpaw who could fight and wasn't a massive name or whatever, but all he really brought to the table was risk, and he really struggled to get fights. But he worked his way up to that number 1 spot. I think from memory he did say he thought his opportunity had gone when that 12-round draw went against him against Vito Antuofermo, but he got another shot in 1980, this time against Alan Minter in England, and he absolutely took Alan Minter apart and won in the 3rd round. Defended that title numerous times, including a retirement win over Vito Antuofermo in the rematch. Beat Mustafa Hamsho in 1981. He repeated that win in 1984. Defended it numerous times, including against Toney Simpson, Wilfred Scipion, Roberto Duran, Juan Roldan, who was very, very hot at the time. That memorable knockout win over Tommy Hearns. The knockout of John Mugabe, who was undefeated and just absolutely just destroying guys at the time. He beat him in 86 and then left the sport in a very, very bitter way when he lost a disputed 12-round decision to Sugar Ray Leonard. So, as I said, 62-3-2 with 52 KOs, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago now, but what a great middleweight champion he was, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. All right, what do we got in the comments there? Andy says, Hagler for me. Nectar of the God says, Hagler all day, every day. Cal Jane says, Canelo. Pound for Pound King says, can't go against Hagler. Young Gun says, Hagler. I just don't see what Canelo is going to do. What advantage does he have? Glenn says, is that even a question? Marvin by late stoppage, just too much for the ginger one. You're not a fan of Canelo, are you, Glenn? Does it matter who I put up? You're always going to go against him, aren't you? Kane says, have to go Hagler by KO in an all-out war. Toney says, curious to see how Canelo goes against a hard-hitting southpaw. I say goes a distance, and if Canelo can get in and out and stay away from that backhand, Canelo on points. Okay, well said. Tell me Mike McCallum is your last pick, though I think I know who it is. I did Mike McCallum earlier in the show, mate. He was our very first one off the starting grid, and I had Canelo Alvarez in a very, very, very close, tough decision. Now, you might go against that. A lot of people, look, the poll, by the way, had 82% said Canelo would beat McCallum, by the way. I thought, and I think, it would Canelo would win, but it would be an extremely close, tough fight. So But that's who I went for in that one. Who we got there? Young guns, footwork, power, speed, athleticism, IQ. None of those I can give Canelo. Toby says Brits were a total disgrace against Hagler in London. They were, Toby. They rained down on the ring, didn't they, with bottles and whatever they could find on the ring. It was disgraceful because Hagler didn't get a chance to enjoy his moment. He didn't get a chance to be interviewed. I don't think he even had a chance to put his belt on when the fight was stopped. The bottles and everything came in the ring, and they almost had to, well, actually, they did have to put a human shield around Hagler to get him back to the change room. So not a great night in British boxing history, Toby. What do you got there, Young Guns? Super chat. $1.99 from you, mate. Did you go do James, Toney, and Roy Jones? Now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I actually had James, Toney in there. Now, along the line of, I've obviously chosen someone ahead of him, and I don't know why. Apologies about that, guys. I have left out James, Toney. We will put him as the 11th guy. I've got a slide made up for James, Toney, but he's not on here. I've obviously chosen, I think I had Iran Barkley. I said that earlier. I had Iran Barkley, and I took him out for a couple of these other guys. I'm not sure who I've replaced James, Toney with. So apologies about that, guys, because let's make it 11 tonight, not 10. Okay? So apologies about that, Young Gum. And Roy Jones Jr. is next. Don't worry, mate. What do we got there? Dennis says, Marvin, too many angles and IQ. McCallum by decision. Not going to argue with that, Glenn. As I said, mate, that was a really, really hard one to split, even though 82% went for Canelo in that one. Yeah, it was a crazy moment, pound for pound. All right, for the Hagler fight with Canelo. Again, not as one-sided as I think a lot of people had it. I certainly don't agree with 76% said Hagler. Look, I'm going to go for Hagler in this one, but I'm not going to discount Canelo Alvarez. I just think Hagler's work rate, again, his IQ, his ability to change angles, his ability to take a punch, and his ability to maybe not just stand flat-footed with Canelo. I think that would cause Alvarez some problems. I'm going to back Marvin Hagler by decision. I won't say an easy decision. I just almost liken the fight to what it would probably be against Duran. Even though Duran was a blown-up lightweight, I get that, or blown-up welterweight, however you want to see him. The fact of the matter is, I think style-wise, I think the way that Marvin Hagler beat Duran would be the same way he would beat Canelo. But don't forget that Hagler also had all sorts of problems with Canelo Alvarez. Not Canelo Alvarez, with Marvin. Hagler had also, I'm just looking at the slide here. Sorry, guys. I got sidetracked. Hagler had all sorts of problems with Roberto Duran. And again, he was that blown-up lightweight. So I'm going to go with Hagler on points. But I don't think it's as easy as a lot of people out there think. I think, again, he wins by just IQ, work rate, and I think he frustrates Canelo with his style, with his switching, and I think he wins on points. All right, let's go. We're going to go to overtime with this one and have 11 fights, guys. I don't know who I've put in. Maybe I was going to take out... If I was going to take out anyone, it would have been either Eubank or Benn or Jackson. So apologies about that, guys. But I did have James, Toney in there. So I don't know what happened there. All right, we will move on to, the second last. Actually, we'll go with James, Toney now. Before we get to the last one with Roy Jones Jr., I'll bring up his record and we'll have a quick look. Of course, I don't begrudge any of you guys out there saying, what is he doing? You can't have a Canelo top 10 and you haven't got James, Toney in there. So I'll bring up his record. So James lights out Toney. I won't bring up the slide because I haven't got one readily available. 77-10 with 3 draws, 47 KOs. Now he turned pro in 1988, had his first world title opportunity against Michael Nunn, and a big upset in 1991. He knocked him out in 11 rounds. Michael Nunn was probably in the top 2 or 3 pound-for-pound fighters at that stage. That was for the IBF middleweight belt. He had the draw with Mike McCallum in 91 as well. Probably goes to show what a fighter Mike McCallum was, by the way, that he took him to a draw. Won the rematch over Mike McCallum. Had a 9th round stoppage over Iran Barkley. Beat the likes of... where was it? Who was he? Prince Charles Williams. Had the loss to Roy Jones Jr. in 1994. That was when Roy Jones Jr. was at his peak, wasn't it? He had, let's go through his record there. Beat Montel Griffin. Had the third fight with Mike McCallum, won over 12 rounds. Just going through his record here. Just so many good fights was James Toney. Actually moved up to heavyweight and beat Evander Holyfield, if you can believe that. No contest with John Ruiz. Beat, Hassim Rahim? No, that was a draw. Just trying to go. I'm not going to go to his later record, guys, because it's not worth going through. He ended up as a heavyweight, and a few of those fights were actually embarrassing for him. But James, lights out. Toney, who have we got? Of course, I haven't got a poll there, but give me your thoughts before I give you mine. All right, Angry Mexican. Leonard, Hearns, both welterweights. Duran a lightweight. Even Mugabe was a 154. Seems like all Hagler best wins are guys that fought at lower weight classes. Should he get criticised more for that? Good point, Angry Mexican. So this is the thing. We've got to sometimes just take off the rose-coloured glasses and get past that. These are all-time greats. These are our favourite fighters. And we've got to look at it for what it is. And this is why I get a little bit bent out of shape when people rubbish guys like Canelo Alvarez, his resume, because he's literally, and Floyd Mayweather's another one, they've literally just cleaned out numerous divisions and they just don't get enough credit. But that's a very, very good point there, Angry Mexican. I'm still going to go for Hagler over Canelo, but you're right, all his best wins came against guys who weren't natural 160-pounders. I don't think it would have made a hell of a lot of difference. I think he still would have beaten Hearns and Duran. Leonard's probably, we lost to him anyway, didn't he? But very, very good point there, Angry Mexican. But, I can't argue with those points. What do we got here? Toney on points, says Glenn. James had a good win at cruiserweight. Yeah, I've got his record there, have I? Still got it up there. I'm not recognise any big names there, mate. So none jump out at me anyway. Andy says James Toney for me. Pound for pound says there's no right or wrong answers. One punch can change a fight, and we have seen plenty of guys win fights. They shouldn't have. Good point. What's that, Toney? Off topic. Late 90s, early 2000s, a heavyweight boxer refused to come out the corner, and the poor fella started crying into a breakdown. Anyone know who this was? I'm interested to see what happened. That was Oliver McCall, Toney, against Lennox Lewis, the rematch. I think that's the one you're discussing or referencing there. He did have a breakdown in the corner. He'd knocked out Lennox Lewis before that. And, he had a complete meltdown in the corner, mate. And, he retired in the corner. He's back amongst it now, surprisingly. So it's good to see he's got his life back on track. What do you got there? I think I mentioned that. Pound for pound says Toney. Young Guns, I'm going with Toney by decision. But, man, I'd love to see those two in the pocket. Yep, Andy says, Angry Mexican forgets to mention those guys went past 160 while Hagler didn't. Okay, yep. Toby says James Toney, but a great fight, 100%. Dennis, thanks for the $5 there, mate. Really appreciate it, mate. No comment, just maintaining my stellar super chat strike rate. No, I really appreciate it, mate. Thanks very much for that. All right, for my decision on Canelo and James Toney, I am going for Canelo Alvarez in this fight. I thought, look, James Toney, very, very good fighter. Probably in the mold of, say, Bernard Hopkins. Same type of style, I suppose. Awkward. Didn't do anything particularly well, but did everything very well, if that makes sense. But I just think, in this one, I'm just going with a gut feel. Because if I probably explain my reasoning, it probably is the same as the reason why I picked him to beat McCallum and why I thought he would go okay with Hopkins and these types of guys. I just call it a gut feel. I just think Canelo would be able to read James Toney very well. I think he would be able to counter Toney very well. And I'm going to go with Canelo Alvarez on points. Okay, so for no particular reason, same reason I've got him beating a few of those early guys. But yeah, Canelo on points for me. Toney disagrees. Does anyone actually agree with me in these last few? So he's gone for James Toney. But a great fight, says Toney. Nectar of the Gods. Young Gun says James, 2 losses to Montel Griffin are a bit shocking. Yep. Dennis says he likes Canelo in this one. Yeah, so that is for me. That is the bonus fight for tonight. Let's get on to the last fight, number 11. and we've saved probably the, is it the biggest one of all? Maybe not. But I've gone for Roy Jones Jr. It's probably the main event of all these dream fights with Canelo Alvarez. He had, where are we? A record of, hang on, I've missed him there. A record of 66-10 with 47 KOs. A lot of those losses came late in his career, though. He turned pro in 1989 after that heartbreaking loss at the Olympic Games. And he turned pro, with a second-round knockout of Ricky Randall. Got his first shot at the title in 1993, as I said before, against Bernard Hopkins, winning a 12-round decision. Had wins over James Toney in the meantime. Vinny Pazienza, one of my favourites as well. Tony Thornton, good fighter as well. Eric Lucas, Mike McCallum. Lost the title by disqualification to Montel Griffin. Very fortunate guy was Montel Griffin, wasn't he? He was getting dominated and pulled it out while Jones just sort of let it go, didn't he? He avenged that loss with a win over Montel Griffin, I should say. That spectacular body shot knockout of Virgil Hill continued on till he, where was it? He had his, and beat our own Glenn Kelly in 2002. Went up to heavyweight and beat John Ruiz for the WBA title. Then beat Antonio Tarver. And this is where, for me, I'm going to draw the line right there. In 2003, after that, first win over Antonio Tarver, because I think after that, not only did he campaign at 175 ongoing, I just think that was the last time we saw prime and peak Roy Jones Jr., because after that he would lose to Antonio Tarver, Glenn Johnson, Antonio Tarver again, 3 fights in a row. He would lose to Joe Calzaghe. That was actually quite competitive. He did have a win over Phyllis Trinidad in there as well, by the way, and Jeff Lacey. Knocked out by our own Danny Green in 2009. Came back and lost to Bernard Hopkins, and I'm just going to forget about it after that, because none of those fights are really worth looking at. So that's where I'm going to draw the line with these guys. Now, I'm going to make this fight at sort of 160 to 168. I'm not certainly going to put them in the ring together at 175, because Canelo just did not carry the weight that well. If I've got to decide one or the other, let's just say 168. That's where we're going to make this fight. I'm going to see where his last fight at 168 was. It was actually in 96 against Bryant Brandon, but he had some really good performances before that. So let's just say 168, Roy Jones Jr. All right, to the poll. And 71% went for Roy Jones Jr. to beat Canelo Alvarez. What do we got here? Let's go to some comments. All right, so the previous fight with Toney, nobody out counter punches or out counters Toney, certainly not Canelo. Well, I disagree, Glenn. Toney says, Canelo for me, if the Roy that fought Danny Green turns up. He's not turning up, Toney. This is peak Roy Jones Jr., mate, at sort of 160, 168. Young Gun says, I think the 90s Roy Jones at 160 to 168 is the best I've seen. And he says, Roy Jones, any weight for me. He was a problem for anybody in his prime. Yeah, Dennis, which version of Jones? That 94, 95, 96 sort of version of Roy Jones Jr. Just absolutely unbelievable. Pound for Pound King says Roy just too quick in his at his peak. Excellent hand speed, which I think would give Canelo problems. Toby says Roy Jones Jr. He was the best at middleweight in my opinion. Nectar of the God says Roy at any weight for me. Have to go Roy on this one for sure. Dennis says Roy looked unbeatable for a while back then. And he says Canelo is a great champion, very accomplished and deserves full praise for them. It's just the styles and resumes of others that dictate my selection. Props where props due to all of them. Yeah, good call there. And isn't it just great fun to match these guys up against each other? And there's really no right or wrong answer. Well, there is if you ask Glenn anyway, but anyone but Canelo. But just some great matchups. Young Guns, I think Roy wins over Toney at 168. Is the best ever in that division. How many people voted? I think there's sort of about 35 to 40 pound for pound. So it sort of gives us enough indication, I think, of what people are thinking out there anyway. Peak Roy beats Canelo, says Toney. Gee, okay, this is the other surprise of the night. Glenn actually thinks Canelo gives Roy some problems. 168, I think it's a close fight that I think goes a distance with Roy winning just. See, I don't hate Canelo. Can we do Stephen Marks next week? No, we can't, Tony. All right, so for my verdict on this fight, look, for me, this one was actually probably one of the easiest ones for me to actually choose. I think Roy Jones Jr. wins this fight when he's at his peak, hands down. I think his height, his advantage in reach, his hand speed, his foot speed, the angles, the footwork, you name it. I just think every single thing that Roy Jones Jr. brings to the table is enough to beat Canelo Alvarez. I think I'll say it, I think it's a one-sided, lopsided win for Roy Jones Jr. I think he barely loses a round. I think if Dimitri Bivol could frustrate Canelo Alvarez the way that he did and make him pay with the counters and the work rate and everything that he had, I think Roy Jones Jr. would do it twofold. And I think he dominates Canelo Alvarez and wins a one-sided decision for me. And that's my verdict on that one. What else have we got there, mate? Andy, this is bloody awesome. Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate it, mate. I hope you like the next one we're going to do anyway. It's always great fun, isn't it? Our Mexican fans won't be happy. No, they won't, mate. Young Gun says, Roy not stopping Canelo for me, but 9-3 or 8-4. I'm going even as far as 10-2, 11-1. Young Guns, again, I think it's clear-cut for me as far as a win for Roy Jones Jr. All right, let's recap the night, shall we? We'll go through the fights. And again, apologize. I don't know what happened with the Bernard Hopkins one, but we've put him in there anyway. Let's start with Mike McCallum. 82% said that Canelo Alvarez would beat Mike McCallum. Julian Jackson, 76% said Canelo would beat Julian Jackson. I've got a feeling that was the one I was going to pull out. But anyway, it is what it is. Eubank, Chris Eubank Sr., 82% said Canelo Alvarez would beat Chris Eubank. What do we got there? Nigel Benn, 94% said that Canelo Alvarez would beat Nigel Benn. Actually, I'll just go back, sorry. I said about Mike McCallum, I also went for Canelo over McCallum along with the 82%. I also went for Jackson along with the Alvarez over Jackson along with the 76%. I went for Canelo to beat Chris Eubank like the 82%, and I've gone for Canelo to beat Nigel Benn like the 94%. For Joe Calzaghe, I went for Calzaghe to beat Alvarez, and 53% agreed. Oscar De La Hoya, I actually went for Canelo Alvarez to beat Oscar, but it was a 50-50 split in that one. For Thomas Hearns, I went for Canelo. 59% went for Thomas Hearns. Bernard Hopkins, I went for Hopkins. 59% also went for Hopkins. For James Toney, I went for Canelo Alvarez in that one. For Marvin Hagler, I did go for Hagler. 76% agreed and went for him as well. For Roy Jones, I went for Roy Jones Jr. and 71% agreed. All right, let's get a couple of more comments there before we call it a night. What do we got there? Young Guns. Hopkins said the hardest he had ever been hit when he was younger was Roy Jones with a body shot. Said the hand speed was too much. Young Guns also says Floyd small for Roy. Yep. Disappointed there was no Benavides, Lyndon says next to the guys. Yeah, well, which one are we? I'm assuming it's not David Benavides. Was it Wilfred Benitez? Maybe you're talking about there next to the guys. You can only put in so many, but look, there's so many different fighters. I mean, I know I could have put guys like Carlos Monzon in there, but I just think it's a little bit more interesting when we put guys around the same era that maybe just missed each other by a few years. But what a great champion Alvarez or Canelo Alvarez has been, and I'm sure we'll continue to go for the next couple of years anyway. But what did you think? Give us your thoughts. As for next week's episode now, by popular demand, it is going to be Costa Zoo. I had numerous people message me about that and comment on these episodes, and we will do we'll call him one of us, won't we? The Aussie Costa Zoo, and look at some of the fights we're going to match him up against. I've got a bit of a list here that I've already made. It's not final yet, but these are some of the guys we're looking at for Costa Zoo. Aaron the Hawk Pryor, Hector Macho Camacho, Meldrick Taylor, Pernell Whitaker, Roberto Duran, Manny Pacquiao, Pacquiao, sorry. Miguel Cotto, Timothy Bradley, sort of toying with that one. Vinny Pazienza, Oscar De La Hoya, just to name a few. So give me some thoughts who you think we should match up Costa Zoo with in next week's episode. Young Guns, Roy Jones versus Andre Ward. I did actually consider Andre Ward for Canelo. There was probably another one, but more at 168, 175. Again, we can only fit so many in there. For the record, I think Andre Ward probably schools Canelo Alvarez, but I didn't put that one in there. Toney, Grouse Night, really look forward to it. No worries at all, mate. Well, it's a new concept I'm trying to sort of build every week. And after next week, after Costa Zoo, again, if you've got any other recommendations that you want me to put in there, there's a million different fighters we could put up. But as I said, next week will be Costa. But I want to do an episode where I do the best dream fights of every division all put together and who wins and why. So it'll probably be the after Costa or the week after that, whatever. We'll see how we go. But the best dream fight that can be made at heavyweight, cruiserweight, light heavyweight, and we'll go right through the divisions. So if you've got any thoughts on that, let me know as well. But guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Really appreciate everyone that's joined in. Make sure you put your opinions and comments and all that sort of stuff down there so I can see it. Make sure you also follow me on Instagram so that when I put the poll up, you can have a say in it. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Look forward to next week when we focus on Costa Zoo. Have a great week, and we'll catch you then.